I would like to view, please, the starting video, and then I would like to invite Donald Cooper, Director of the Transparency Division at UN Climate Change, to start with our opening remarks. Thank you for joining us.
Was it short and sweet? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. More? Away in, perfect. Sorry. You have to do something silly in order to them to balance the sound. I didn't think you guys were paying attention, so I didn't think it would matter. But now that everybody is here and ready to shine, before I start, you SIDS have some remarkable things that you have to live up to in the future, you know. Should I tell you now? Yes. Why not? Parties have demonstrated very clearly, even at the beginning of this COP, that if you present something well and reasonable, they are willing to go along with you and push it quickly. Remember, it was the SIDS who introduced the solution to loss and damage funding when you suggested that the relief received from cyclones or hurricanes was countries providing you on an ad hoc basis with funds for loss and damage due to climate change. This became a reasonable thing to solidify and move from being random to being predictable. After the first high-level dialogue that the Caribbean SIDS had, this was enshrined in the conclusions that they reached and they put forward at the COP. And the parties agreed and established the Loss and Damage Fund for specially vulnerable countries, LDCs and SIDS in particular. And they liked the idea and the direction so much that, as you can see, they are doing at least initial efforts in putting funds where their talk was. They are putting money in the Loss and Damage Fund for small island developing states and the least developed countries, the specially vulnerable countries. So your voice is not just heard, not just listened to, but it is acted on. You provided a direction on a subject that nobody could agree to even start talking about. But you made a breakthrough. Now, I don't know how long or how well or where it's going to be located or what the criteria are for accessing the funds, but you must have something to access in the first place in order to have that debate. You have moved to that debate. Right? So your input is valuable, but it also means there's expectation of what else can you bring to the table. And you should feel confident that whatever else you bring to the table, chances are it will be listened to, it will be acted on, and it will be implemented. One of the benefits that small island developing states have is they're small. The solution is feasible under today's economics. You don't need a change in how revenue is generated and dispersed in order to solve issues linked to resilience or the transition of the workforce or industry, they can be done under the existing economic structure because you are small. $20 billion to address issues for SIDS is feasible. But if you want to address issues for a large South American country like Brazil, 20 billion vanishes. It isn't just to say, let's step forward and address issues for SIDS. It's to say, you become a way in which the world can look at how solutions can be implemented, because the scale allows us to see how we progress. And how do you then expand that to cover all parties? It gives us a way of trying to advance issues where scale causes us to pull back. So it's really quite a remarkable position to be in. And it makes one proud, as someone who comes from an island state as well, that that impact was made and is being made. People are expressing their point of view. I listened to a number of the interventions. I had the good fortune of being able to sit on the podium whilst many of the heads of state and heads of government were making their interventions. And it was remarkable how many heads spoke with the passion of the words they were saying. In other words, they were not distanced from the words. You can sit here and read, the car is red, the tires are black, and there's no link to the words. But you could hear that they meant what they were saying. And it makes a huge difference. And the number of parties from the small island developing states, especially those in the Pacific, who spoke that way was quite significant. It made you stop and listen. I also watched the engagement after the heads of state or government came down from the podium. Normally, there is an entourage that then rushes you out to the back, around where the bathrooms are and the headphones, and swoosh, out through the curtain where the VIP lounge is, never to be seen again. But I noticed that many of them were stopping along the way and chatting to their fellow colleagues, heads of state and government who were in the room. And people were stopping them to talk. Now, one of the things that politicians are exceptionally good at, regardless of which bit of the world they're from, is talking. That's how they got there in the first place. So, once you can get them engaged, they can deliver more. It also generates a sense of comfort in liaising with those colleagues. So it was good to see how much the leaders were willing to engage. We often forget that every party here agrees to the same thing. Every single one ratified the Paris Agreement. They agreed to the goals. They agreed to everything. What they can't agree on is just how to get there. Not where we want to go, it's how to get there. And it is often when we shift the debate from what we want to how can we achieve the things we want, we make the biggest breakthroughs. And if you think back to the loss and damage, that's exactly what you did. You shifted the debate from what we want to how do we get to the solution of the problem we had. And it worked. By the way, you see, I'm quite lonely up here. And I'm not just talking for talking's sake. So you should know that I really do enjoy talking for talking's sake. And I don't know, I never seem to run out of words, but I won't let that get to my head. But I often don't get the chance to put some interesting things out there. Remember, I'm not just talking to you here, I'm talking to those people flying around in the sky up there somewhere, in the ether known as the internet, where people are able to examine what we are doing and why we are doing it. Each one of us is the pinnacle of some crazy fancy pyramid. Now, I don't mean that kind of pyramid, just normal kind of pyramid, where you are the person that has been put here by them to make sure that they get more prosperous, their lives continue, their kids enjoy living. You are the ones who have this entire constituency beneath you. Whether you're an NGO, representing a company, representing a country, a sector, you are representing a group. So you speak on their behalf. And the end product of your being here is that their lives must be better when you get home. Right? You have to explain something. So I am looking to see over the course of the next 12 days or so what magical things the group will be able to report on. We've had a series of additional high-level dialogues which have gone exceptionally well. And the biggest gain has been in establishing a camaraderie. I was in Grenada, where the heads of state and government were there, and you couldn't get them to stop talking. Normally, you have to invite them to speak. You had to invite them to stop speaking. And they were sitting around the table talking to each other and making deals. They were agreeing on how they were going to address matters at the COP, what matters they wanted to address. They were explaining solutions that they found that their colleagues can now find. They were establishing the network necessary to move things forward. I am looking forward to that extending to be SIDS-wide, because you represent roughly a third, approaching a third of all parties in the entire process. Quite impressive influence. Now, I want to close out my section by thinking of where we might go over the course of the next several years. What kinds of significant achievements would make a difference for the constituents that you are the pinnacle of the triangle for? I heard today in the plenary one of the heads of state saying what made a difference for their country was it 30-year loans at less than 1% for their private sector with no payments for the first 10 years. And he said it made a big difference in their country, not for the government, but for the private sector. I know in my country, the Bahamas, if you offered me 0.5% loan with no payments for 10 years, I might be interested in doing something. Many of our countries are going to start to look at things like electric vehicles. Taking my tiny little country, the island I live on is 9 miles by 21 miles. So what's that? 12 by 25 or 30 kilometers. It is tiny. So if I can get 450 kilometers out of one charge on my electric car, I can drive for 10 days or so without having to charge the thing back up. So when you start to think in terms of practical reality, I'm far better off with an electric car, not because I'm saving the planet, because I'm far better off with an electric car. Right? So where does this go? Our island is probably small like most of the ones that you guys live on. So are there reasons why it is better? In the Pacific, you have shown the world that you can push your country to almost complete renewable energy. What's the average across the entire region? 65, 67% of all power comes from renewable sources. Quite remarkable. But it is done on small islands where they say it's economically not feasible. Well, they prove that wrong. They are able to push forward with electric vehicles because they also have cheap electric power from renewable sources. So again, demonstrating to the world the direction it can go in. So I am looking forward to these creative ideas that many of you take for granted. But if you look at the rest of the world, they are nowhere near that. They are struggling to get there. How did you manage it? I'm looking forward to those lessons being put forward and how you can provide further guidance for the process going forward. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to extend invitation to our first guest. And by the way, our guests are on the way, but this complex has got so many bottlenecks that they get caught in that they will be arriving as we proceed with the rest of the meeting. So I would like to invite the Minister for Environment and Public Service, Public Enterprise, now in Fiji. Here, I've been practicing this. Sakiusa Tubuna. I apologize most sincerely, sir, and we are in your hands.
Thank you, David. Thanks for attempting not to mention my name, but unfortunately it's not the wrong name. My name is Sakiusa Tubuna, and I'm from Fiji. And of course, I would like to thank David for taking his time to also to lecture us on some of issues that we are trying to address at this meeting. And of course, I firmly believe that David will be a future politician. Excellencies, a very good evening to you all. The Pacific comes with a clear and urgent message. Adaptation cannot wait. The time for action is now. And we must take bold steps to secure the survival and prosperity of our nations and all those who call our islands home. The vulnerability of our communities demands an unprecedented level of cooperation, innovation, and commitment from all global partners. In order to fulfill our national and regional goal on adaptation, it is imperative that we take into consideration the unique circumstances that characterize our individual nations. The varying ecological, social, and economic landscapes within our region demand tailored strategies that are both contextually relevant and rooted in a comprehensive understanding of our vulnerabilities. Our regional partnerships must be underscored by a commitment to securing the necessary funding mechanisms and technical support needed to translate our aspirations into tangible actions. It simply must be within the realm of our collective capacity to forge a future that safeguards our unique identities and ensures the well-being of our communities. A milestone decision taken at the opening of COP28 to move the Loss and Damage Fund established in COP27 to an operational entity is a significant step. This decision reflects the efforts invested by AOCs for over 3 decades. Over this time, global emissions have only increased and exacerbated the urgent need to address loss and damage. Pacific has been central voice in the call for new and additional financing to address loss and damage, because we are all too familiar with the realities of loss and damage. It is crucial that the new board of the Loss and Damage Fund lays the groundwork for responsive, nationally determined and context-relevant approaches to addressing loss and damage. We know that for finance to effectively address loss and damage, it must be deployed through national systems and incentivize the development of robust long-term national arrangements to manage loss and damage over time. We advocated for this tirelessly over the course of this year and see many of our priorities reflected in the outcome decision and governing instrument for the fund. Colleagues, this COP must also deliver on the broader package of climate financing needs. The 100 billion a year target for climate finance, which was pledged a decade ago and was due by 2020, was not met. This was an achievable goal, and the failure to reach it in a timely fashion only increases aggregate financing needs, gaps, and deficits. Moving forward, we need to agree to a new goal which is reflective of the scale of the challenge we face. As you all know, the COP is mandated to conclude the first ever global stocktake to evaluate our progress against the goals of the Paris Agreement. We know we are not on track to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The window for doing so is closing, and we cannot live here without a decision that protects this vital guardrail. We need a package which includes a commitment to peak emission by 2025, put forward 1.5 degrees, aligned NCDs, and phase out fossil fuel subsidies. The outcome of the GST and the political declaration, it must prompt needs to move us towards the phase out of fossil fuels. In addressing our individual climate change priorities, Pacific Small Island Developing States, PSIDS, and wider AOCs continue to push for a great emphasis on real risk of losing our oceans in this fight. To stabilize our climate, we need to deliver solutions that protect our oceans from further damage, and to do soon, because our oceans cannot buffer us from the full brunt of global heating much longer. The state of our oceans is not just a concern for small islands. They are responsible for much of the air in your lungs. They drive rainfall patterns and feed billions of people daily, and for some of us, they put a cornerstone of our identity, history, and culture. We want to ensure that the world knows we will act. We in the Pacific will do all we can to ensure that our oceans survive this carbon vandalism. We in the Pacific, and as leaders, are the custodians of our oceans, our lives within it, and the lives that depend on it. And it is our solemn duty to ensure its protection. Excellencies, SIDS must continue to act as a moral compass within this process, fighting to ensure our message, our experience, and our understanding shapes this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I hope that you got the clear distinction in emphasis between the points I raise and the points the Honorable Minister raises. I represent the system. He represents people. So the real world is when he speaks. How to address those is what I bring to the table and try to elaborate on. But it is, I want to thank you, Minister, for elaborating very clearly those key issues that are of importance to SIDS. And in addressing them, you address them for all. It was told to me that all of the SIDS are small island developing states, except for those few countries that managed to get that badge, even though they're not an island or small. But one thing that almost every one of us have in common is that even though we are small islands, we are very big oceans. So the amount of national territory that you have is quite considerable. I heard in the plenary this morning the Prime Minister for the Bahamas say that the carbon removal capability of the oceans around the Bahamas is greater than that for the Amazon. So many of your countries are in a very similar position. So when you are looking at options on how to address funding, I strongly urge that you look at that huge blue resource that you have. In addition, we have an opportunity at this COP to achieve something big. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we will, right? But the possibility exists. This is day 1, 2, 3. You are in a position to push for the maximum. We are not in the compromise stage as yet, known as negotiating a settlement, but you have the ability to push. And there is a willingness to address issues on the understanding that if you don't address them now, you might have to address them in the next COP or the COP after that, and it might be easier to address them in this COP. So there's a possibility. So we ask you to think not just of what you might achieve, but of what is the maximum that you would like to achieve. Right? So with that, I would like to give the opportunity for any questions or comments that people might have before we move to close our meeting, because I do not see the Honorable Prime Minister here, and I was told he's on the way and he's trying to maneuver his way through, but I will see if there are any questions or comments people would like to raise. Yes, please.
Yes, in fact, I'm Alvin Petty from Mauritius, also one of the SIDS.
Wasn't me.
I don't know, maybe it was myself, so I don't. The fact is that we all know that climate change has SIDS contribute a very small amount in terms of carbon emissions, but we face the whole. It's like we face all the dramatic challenges that are associated with climate change. So the message is that we need support. We really need support in order from all international agencies. We need to work together in terms of finding the right solutions, right financing mechanism, the right technologies, and there is a significant amount of collaboration which is required in terms of bringing this collaboration together in order to be able to fight the impacts of climate change. And very often, the language is towards the physical impact of climate change, where we talk about the increasing sea level rise, increasing shifts in precipitations, more severe cyclones, and so on. We talk very little about the socio-economic impact related to climate change. And when we look at it at the macroeconomic level, at the level of how it will affect our different economies is very significant. There's not only this aspect of the physical changes which are happening, but also all the changes in terms of food security, in terms of how the economic flows will evolve with the changes that are happening at the level of climate change. And we really need to sit together and consider that climate change is really a question of survival for small island developing states.
Thank you very much. Yep. And if you could take the mic to back row, far right. Yes, that's a very important point. Everything you do, see, experience is climate change because it happens on this planet. And you have to adjust it to fit whatever this planet gives you. And many countries are having to do a lot of adjusting in order to be able to just live their normal lives. So everything you're doing is being impacted. Sir, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, and comment on your leadership and the statement that has been made by the Honorable Minister from Fiji. Just standing here as a growing man in an island amongst the SIDS countries. And I was thinking along the way when I came here for this, the first CUP that I've been attended. I looked back on the history from 1995. That's where this arena has been created to put together people who've been enjoy their developed society, which put some consequences that fall back from the beginning of the river to the end of the river that has been affected some of the small islands that have been shrinking down on the stream of the river. The question is, since 1995 up to now, does the people in those front stream of the river really understand the on and off of the switch of what to stop the changes of the end of the climate change? Or we just know, or just seeing a child playing with a match and know there will be a fire happening, but just, oh, just leave it, he will know what to do. But on the other hand, it's just more like giving back resources, money, for those islands that have been bear the consequences. And more like assume, oh, don't worry. We know what will be, we know the answers. It's a matter of commit and act. But since 1995 up to now, it's a matter of talking, getting together, talking, while the SIDS and people bear the consequences are having more hurricanes, more experience the increase in the sea level, experiencing more disasters that they've never been enjoyed before. The question is, because we all know the answer. The question is, when does those people have the power and authority to do like this? And the answer is there. Or we will come again next year and meet in another COP, the following year, and meet in another COP with a very interesting topics and areas to discuss. But the question is, how many years we have to talk until we turn off the switch? Because we all know the answers from 1995. Or we have to still talking, and our children in 50 years from now will come and still experience the consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we have two more, and then I'll bring the meeting to a close. Sir?
Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. I'm the Premier of the British Virgin Islands government. And of course, I'm here in solidarity with fellow small island developing states. In 2017, the British Virgin Islands was hit with devastating flooding and 2 Category 5 hurricanes, one by the name of Hurricane Irma and the other Hurricane Maria, that caused damage to our islands. That's 200% of our GDP, which is over $2.6 billion worth of damage. And to be able to recover from the devastating impacts of those climate disasters, we are forced to go to the private sector to borrow. We don't have access to concessional finance because OECD rules only looks at your gross national income. And we are here advocating for a metric which is more fair and takes into account our vulnerability. 90% of our government facilities were either destroyed or damaged. We had to rebuild schools, recreational facilities, medical facilities, administrative buildings, and it's an incredibly a large burden on public finances, not speaking about the plight of our citizens who are still struggling to recover from those events, which we're now 6 years removed from. So we're seeking solidarity with our fellow small island developing states, that territories of the United Kingdom and other states, which because of the metric and how we measure eligibility for overseas development aid, concessionary finance, grants, how those things are measured, we are locked out, we're on the outside, and we are struggling to be able to recover. And as we all know, we have an increased frequency of these events, and all we can do is pray that we're not hit while we're still trying to recover from the last set of storms. So we are certainly seeking the support so that we can be acknowledged in the United Nations framework as it pertains to adaptation funds, green climate funds, as well as through OECD rules where the the United Kingdom can allow us to have access to the overseas development aid, and that we can get concessional finance so that we can recover and that we can mitigate and adapt. Thank you.
Yeah. Sir, and by the way, I've been informed that the Prime Minister of the Bahamas is about to arrive, so please continue.
Sure. Quick question. I'm not sure if anyone will be able to answer it, but Health Day is tomorrow, is the first ever Health Day at COP, of course. I haven't heard too many mentions surrounding health in this discussion. I was just wondering how the different representatives at SIDS view this day and and the influence of health within climate change discussions as well. Obviously, there's no one up there, but if anyone wants to talk about it later or has a comment on that, also would be interesting to see. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And remember, if a group does not engage on a matter, it doesn't mean it's not highly important to them. Climate is so all-encompassing that most countries identify what are the key priority areas that they must address first. And when they come to the COP, they then target those key priority ones. it doesn't mean the others aren't just as significant, but you put things in a ranking order. And healthcare is the significance of healthcare is that it has been identified by so many parties that it has now risen to be an issue on its own. They're now identifying it as one of those key areas. So I would tend to think that over the course of future meetings, you will find more and more activities linked to healthcare and also primary healthcare, food production, accommodation, these kinds of issues as well. Any other questions or comments? You keep raising your hand. Oh, you're just waving. Yes.
Thank you. It's an observation or a sort of rhetorical question or think question. I mean, let us say, because I don't know the exact figure, but let's say the United Nations, even UNFCCC and the larger system have identified and have been working on an agenda for SIDS over the last quarter century, during which time you've seen various kinds of evolution in the SIDS, economic, environmental, political. But the persistence of the devastating impact of climate events remain and are worsening, as we know, and the trajectory of improvement in the overall climate system is not very encouraging for SIDS. I want to ask you to help me think about whether or not there is a similar kind of evolution in the institutions and mechanisms controlled by the United Nations to parallel that development. And does it, if there is, does it work for or against SIDS? So, for example, we know that the whole question of what do we call it, maturation or graduation. It's something that reflects the economic improvement of the SIDS, but at the same time, there's a sort of feeling of penalizing them out of concessional financing because they have made some economic movement forward. So you could leave that aside. Now we're even trying to get the multi-vulnerability index, as a way of responding to that to make sure that our true conditions are reflected. So are we in a bind with the United Nations in the sense that we cannot do better at governing or improving ourselves, lest we be
don't let the gentleman distract you.
Well, I'm happy to let that gentleman distract me because he advocates. He's one of our best advocates. Welcome, Prime Minister. I'll be short. So, are we in a bind where if we improve our situation, we have maybe two options. You have the option of Malta and Cyprus. You leave, you go to join a big developed group, or you stay and fight the system to recognize our uniqueness and our continuing need. So that's it really. It's a sort of a reflection. Can we in fact make the kinds of progress that is mandated in the convention, that our first priority is to remove poverty, that the deteriorating climate system frustrates that, and as we respond to it, that could potentially be seen as enough improvement that we are no longer vulnerable. And the last point is that, in fact, because there has been this focus on the SIDS and its unique vulnerabilities, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but it seems that so many countries are now coming under that rubric of vulnerable, so that the SIDS are not sure where is the focus for their unique response. If I'm wrong, it's okay, but this bundle of questions are revolving in my head. Thank you.
The problem with asking very, very long, multiple faceted questions that go deep is that you can't get a very deep answer in return because it has to be a considered response. I'd like to point out a couple of things that might help. Even in the last 5 years, from the perspective of climate, so that bit of the UN and all the linked bits, the small island developing states on their own have greatly increased in significance. And the voice that they have has greatly increased in significance just in the last 5 years. The willingness for that group of states to speak out has also significantly increased. I think that at this stage, the SIDS have the ability to inject their views and their needs onto the world as SIDS. It does not mean diminishing any of the other affiliations, whether they are regional, sub-regional, G77 in China, but SIDS have a powerful voice. In terms of whether other entities try to dilute or take part in the gains that one group makes, that is what always happens. When one is successful, others see an avenue to gain that success. So it's as much a burden as a compliment that you were able to achieve it. And how you significantly bring those resources to the SIDS is something that the leaders will work towards. And the last point with regards to the UN system. The UN system was considered locked. This is it, you're stuck with it. Now, there is so much talk of reform that it will actually happen. The question is, when it's reformed, what impact will you make on the reform? Now, this goes back to the first thing I said. The voice is louder, more important, and more listened to. So I think the opportunity is to make fundamental adjustments, not only to the way they are structured, but the policies they follow, is much better now than it was before. But there are much better policymakers around than I am, who have probably a much better view. And I'd like to not waste any more time, but ask the Right Honorable Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Philip Davis, who happens to be my Prime Minister, but that's neither here nor there. What I have been most impressed with is this vision. It's one thing to be able to get your group from A to B. But it's completely another to see that you need to get to B. That is an amazing thing. And the whole consultation process that brought the SIDS forward was initiated by Prime Minister Davis. Quite an amazing point, because beforehand, very few SIDS actually address the future as opposed to the past and the present. So I want to thank him for that leadership and invite him to address our group. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Donald, and good evening to all. I'm still optimistic, but I must say time is running out. And the real issue is choices. We could choose to do some things that could avert the impending danger that faces us as small island development states. The challenge for us is that the threat is invisible. You hardly see the sea rising. You would hardly feel the water warming. And in the meantime, you could see some of the choices that's being made. I put that in context of where we are with our threat. And let's look at some of the choices. We choose bullets and bombs over funding the loss and damage liability. We choose our narrow self-interest of profitability to continue the production and burning of fossil fuels. And there's some visibility there. Because, our challenge is not seeing women and girls or women and children bleeding in streets. What we have, but we don't see it. And thank God, when the storm passes, when the water rises through our porous limestone land, and the storm passes over, we hope we could see at the end of it all. We've been talking with the past for too long. And what are we doing about the future? That thought inspired me to call the Caribbean leaders together last year August, to come up with a single voice to be heard at COP 27. And we're able to bind ourselves together as leaders and come up with a declaration. And it informed our negotiators to ensure, one, that loss and damage got on the agenda for last COP. And even though they wanted to limit the debate and negotiations to definition and did not want to include liability, we were able, because of that one voice, to have the liability fund established. Now, so it is our voices coming together that's making some difference. And so I asked myself a question at this COP, and that is, in 2000, there's this commitment for $100 billion. But 13 years ago, what has materialized? It has not materialized. Last year, they committed to fund the liability fund for loss and damage. What has materialized? And what materialized is that at this COP, you had commitments again and pledges. But how long would that take? And so you question the efforts of the industrialized world as to what are they truly trying to do. The efforts to date seem to be, I spoke about voices coming together. Efforts seem to be to reduce the noise pollution brought on by our voices, rather than reducing the carbon emissions, which is our aim. And so are we, because they have committed and pledged these sums at this COP, they sit quietly by and accept it? Or should we be saying, well, look, let's write the check, as opposed to pledging and committing? That's what we've been doing for the last 28 years. And that is the concern I have. I'm an optimist, and I'm not going to sit idly by and give up, because too much is at stake for small island developing states, particularly like ours. As I said once before, if nothing has happened, we all in these small island developing states will become climate refugees or be doomed to a watery grave. And so we must continue not to allow the commitments and pledges, of which I'm fatigued, silence us because it seemed to be that they're committing and they're pledging to keep us, to, as I said, to eliminate the noise pollution brought on by advocacy. We want them to commit and pledge and write the check to enable us as small island development states to have the finances and resources to adapt, to mitigate, and to assist us in alleviating the debt brought onto our family, on our small island developing states because of what we had to invest in recovery and reconstruction following a devastating event as a result of climate change. And this year, we were mercifully and thankfully spared of any hurricanes to the Bahamas. But though spared by hurricanes, we still had tropical depressions and tropical storms, bringing with it extraordinary rain, heavy winds, resulting in flooding, disruption of services like electricity, costing us resources to alleviate the results. And so it's a continuing exercise here. And so I'm happy, they brought something for me to read, but I'm happy to be able just to speak to you from my heart on this question and issue, that please let us keep our voices. Let it not be silenced by the commitments and the pledges. Let us continue the advocacy. Don't let us give up, because that is what is hoped by them. And just ask yourself one question. This is the 28th meeting of the parties. I think this is my third meeting. But after 28 meetings, recognizing the challenge that climate change was about, what have we achieved as a global community? What we have achieved is still rising sea levels, warming of the waters, more frequent and intense hurricanes, flooding and wildfires. So it seemed to me that we've been going backwards than forwards. No progress could be identified over the last 28 years that we can point to say we have done something to reach that 1.5 to stay alive by 2030. And that is in jeopardy. As I've been talking to my advisor today, I was saying, look, we have to now start crafting a new goal, eliminating the 1.5 to stay alive, but rather substituting it for carbon neutrality by probably 2035. And let's push towards that, because the 1.5 is, from all accounts, out of the window. And let us not overlook the fact that the push to continue the use of fossil fuel, it goes on unabated. Within the last month, 2 significant initiatives by the US, by the UK. The US authorized the construction of an oil refinery in Texas, producing 369,000 barrels of oil per day. What does that signal? The United Kingdom authorized, right, the production of an oil field, their largest oil field in, can't remember the name, I think it's Beecham Plains, within the last month. What does that signal? There's nothing of reining back, but seemed to me going forward. And so I urge us all not to give up. Let us not be silent by the pledge and commitment. Let's continue to push. Because at some point in time, the industrialized world will recognize that it is in their own enlightened self-interest to do what they need to do and make the right choice to ensure that we bring success to the fight that we're all in, because they are now being impacted just as we are. I want to thank you for the short, brief intervention, and I will turn it back to Donald.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I'd like to just close out our meeting by inviting the Minister of Climate Resilience and Environment and Renewable Energy from Grenada, Ms. Kerryne James, to close out the meeting for us. Madam Minister.
Thank you so very much, Honorable Prime Minister, Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, distinguished delegates. I know that we are on the time crunch, but it would be remiss of me if I don't say a few words as short as I possibly can. So a pleasant evening to everyone. I just want to express my heartfelt greetings from the government and people of Grenada, and of course from my COP delegation here representing Grenada and small island developing states at this 28th session of COP. We are indeed profoundly grateful to the UAE and Dubai for their exceptional hospitality. And we just came from a meeting with His Royalty, His Highness, and I just want to place on record our appreciation and our thanks and our deep admiration for a bold step in which they pledged $30 billion towards bridging the gap for climate finance. And so I would wrap up my comments by saying that in September of this year, Grenada hosted high-level delegations, prime ministers, for a climate dialogue. Coming out of this dialogue was a call, a clarion call, for us to unite and for us to have one voice. And so I just want to remind us here today, Excellencies as well as other delegates, that as small island developing states, we have to ensure that we continue to collaborate. Without collaboration, we cannot do it. Yes? And as we move forward, I would say that the unity of SIDS remains our greatest strength. Our collective voice in these negotiations is essential. And you heard Prime Minister of Bahamas say it has been a lengthy one. And unfortunately, that's how the climate dialogue and climate change is. It is long, it is tiring, it is exhausting. But we saw last year, and this COP is an action COP, and we see it coming through. And I believe that in the next few weeks, we would see much more pledges coming. And that should be our reminder and our push for us to continue to fight for what we deserve as small and developing states. So I won't be lengthy, but I just want to say, let us continue to choose a path of collaboration and decisive action. Let us, in the spirit of unity, drive the force behind a transformative agenda and a transformative era for climate change for small island developing states. Because this is the only place that we can call home, and we have to do everything we can to protect and save it, even if it might take us 100 years. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
I just want to let the organizers of or the maintenance of this building know that you have to blame me and nobody else for us running late with the meeting. So you can fire me, even though I'm union, but you can fire me for going overtime. So I want to thank you all, but please notice in the conversation, we went from tens of millions to hundreds of millions, now to billions. But you still have to take on board Prime Minister Davis. They are pledges. Turn the pledges into cash. Thank you all very, very much. Can we have a quick photo? Also